Okay, so question number 3, scoring question number 3. Part A had 4 components. Oh, you guys need pens. My apologies. Red pens are right up here on desk 4. Come grab a red pen. All right. So question number 3 was the Bath Fizzy question. This was the probability and distribution, sampling distributions question. If you remember, we talked about all of the things that will be on the free response section. This would be this one right here, a multi-part question with a primary focus on probability and sampling distributions. Part A, 4 components. Correctly calculate the proportion of Bath Fizzies containing $1. So you would do 100% or 1 minus the other probabilities that were given in the table, and you end up with 0.68. Provides correct supporting work for the value calculated in component number 1, so you have to show work for it. Component 3 correctly calculates the proportion of Bath Fizzies containing at least $10. So at least $10 would be, I don't remember all the denominations, but these are the probabilities added together, and we get 0.12. Provides correct supporting work for the value calculated in component 3. If you got 3 of these 4 components, so at least 3 of the 4 components, you get an E. If you got 2 of the components, give yourself a P. And if you got 1 or none, give yourself an I.
Even if you got like the answer for I wrong, it didn't work.
Value calculated in component 1. I don't believe so, because it does say correct supporting work. So, to the best of my understanding, I would have to read through the notes really carefully, but to the best of my understanding, if you did not calculate in part AI correctly, if you did not get the correct one there, but you showed work for it, that would still be a P. I believe. Any other questions about scoring part A on number 3? All right. Scoring part B. There were 2 components here, correctly calculating the requested probability and showing work consistent with the response. So this is the probability of getting $100 given that it contained 10 or more. It containing 10 or more was a probability calculated in part I, that was 0.12. And the probability of getting 100 would be 0.01. This is technically, the numerator is the intersection between at least 10 and 100. But if it's 100, it's automatically at least 10. So that intersection is just the probability of getting 100. And then our probability of 10 or more would be 0.12, giving us a final probability of 0.08, 0.0833. If you got both of the components, please give yourself an E. If you got only one of the components, please give yourself a P. None of the components, give yourself an I. Does anybody have any questions about scoring part B? All right. Let's look at part C then. There are 5 components on part C. You had to get both components 1 and 2, and 2 of the remaining 3 components to get an E. So you have to have the first 2 and 2 out of these 3. Partially correct would be if you get 2 or 3 of components 1 through 4. So 2 or 3 of these would be a partially correct, both 1 and 2, and then at least 2 of these would be an essentially correct. States the correct expected value. So expected value, again, you take the value times the probability plus the value times the probability for all of the values and probabilities in the table, and you add those all together. Shows appropriate work to calculate the expected value. Number 3, interpretation includes the concept of repeating the selection process over a long period of time. The expected value is the mean of the cash prizes that result from the long run of many, many trials of randomly selecting Bath Fizzies and determining the amount each contains. So you have to have the idea of repeating this over a long period of time, so many, many times or over the long run. Interpretation includes the concept of an average or a mean. So you've got one of those two words in there, or the idea of an average or a mean. And then the interpretation includes the context of receiving a cash prize. Make sure to always put your answers in context, especially when you've been asked for interpretations. So if you got the first two components, if you correctly calculated and showed work for the expected value, and you met at least 2 of the 3 criteria for the interpretation, give yourself an E. If you got 2 or 3 of these top 4, not talking about the context, but if you got 2 or 3 of these, then give yourself a P. And if you do not meet the criteria for a partially correct, then give yourself an I. Does anybody have any questions or need any assistance with scoring part C? All right. I liked this one better than the geodes question. But Conrad and his geodes would be under the same category of question as this one. So probabilities, sampling distributions. There will be one multi-part question about that. All right, we're going to go ahead and do question number 4 now. Just like yesterday, I'm going to give you 10 minutes for the question, and then we will score it together. Go ahead and turn to question number 4. Oh, sorry, we forgot to do the numerical. I'm so sorry. I jumped right past that. Give yourself a numerical score. If you got 3, oh, sorry, part D. I totally skipped part D. Good grief. I'm sorry, guys. Part D, the expected value of the distribution of X in euros is 4.68 times 0.89, or about 4.17 euros. Essentially correct if you calculate the number of euros for the expected value showing work and including units. Partially correct if they only calculate the number of euros for the expected value, but is missing either the work or missing the units, would be a partially correct. If you are missing the work and the units and you just have the value of 4.17, unfortunately that would be an incorrect. That would be an I. So showing supporting work, that you're multiplying these two pieces together and putting that label of euros on the answer would get you an essentially correct. Yes? That is totally fine from what I remember. Anytime you're working with money though, even if it's foreign currency, standard is to round it off at 2 decimal places. So if I remember correctly from grading this question, more than 2 decimal places was not counted as incorrect. It just didn't really fit the context. Any other questions on part D? And now we will give ourselves a numerical score. This was graded in 4 parts. So every E is worth 1 point. Every P is worth ½ point. And if you find yourself on the bubble, like you got 2.5, you got to look at your overall responses. Usually on the half points, when in doubt, you're going to round down. It takes an exceptional answer to get them to round up. The only reason that you have that half is because like one minor piece, like if you forgot euros on the end, but everything else about this question was essentially correct, I would probably round up in that case. Welcome. Okay. We are just getting ready to start doing question number 4. So you missed grading question 3, but we'll do question number 4. Now we are ready to begin question number 4. Just like yesterday, 10 minutes for the question, so go ahead and turn to the page with question 4 on it. And your time for this question starts now. These are the things that you're trying to. Here's your chapter 1 multiple choice packet and answers. And here's the chapters 9 and beyond, choice and answers. And then this is your mock exam. It might be helpful to look through there at how the questions were scored, just so that you can get some feedback on how your answers should be modified for the actual exam. Okay, so grading question number 4. Part A, sorry, not Part A, but Section 1. Section 1 had 4 components. You identify a paired t-test, matched pairs or paired t-test for a population mean difference by name or formula. Stating the hypothesis using a single mean, so using mu diff, not mu1 minus mu2, is component 2. States the correct equality for the null hypothesis, so the null hypothesis is that mu is equal to 0, mu diff equals 0, and states the correct direction for the alternative hypothesis. Alternative hypothesis is that mu diff is greater than 0. And then component number 4 provides sufficient context for the parameter by including reference to the population mean difference and the sampling units, so people with the medical condition, and the response variable, irritability score. So you have to make a reference to the entire population, have to talk about the sampling units, the people with the medical condition, and the response variable, the irritability score. If you got all 4 components, then you have an essentially correct. If you have 3 of the 4 components, then it is a partially correct. So looking at the model answer, they let mu diff represent the true mean difference, placebo minus omega-3 of irritability scores for all people with this medical condition. That would be what we would be looking for here in like question or component 4 as well as component 2. Yes. If you said it was a matched pairs, or you did a 1 sample t-test for mu diff, that would be fine. 1 sample t-test for mu diff, yes, that would work. Because that mu diff indicates your matched pairs right there. Null hypothesis, mu diff equals 0. Alternative hypothesis, mu diff is greater than 0. And then talking about matched pairs or 1 sample t-test for mu diff. Do you guys have any questions about scoring section 1 here? All right. Let's go look at section 2 then. Section 2 also had 4 components. Checks the independence condition by referring to the random assignment. So you have that checked off random assignment, preferably quoting directly from the text. Indicates the distribution of irritability scores for the differences, placebo minus omega-3, is not badly skewed. Supports the assumption that the sampling distribution of X bar diff is approximately normal. So this one, did they give you a graph to look at? Yeah, I was going to say they gave you the box and whisker plots to look at. So as opposed to when we've drawn the graphs in the past and we've done dot plots, they gave you these box and whisker plots so that you could make sure that there were not any outliers and it was not strongly skewed, but you didn't have to draw the graph yourself. Correctly reports the value of the t statistic consistent with the named test. Correctly reports the p-value consistent with the stated alternative hypothesis and reported test statistic. So checking for random assignment, checking for normality by referencing the graphs that were provided and stating that they were not strongly skewed or no obvious outliers. Your t-statistic, which let me scroll down so you guys can see what the appropriate t-statistic is. The correct t-statistic is 3.138, and then the correct p-value using 18 degrees of freedom comes out to be 0.0028. So if you had all 4 components, give yourself an essentially correct. If you got only 2 or 3 of the components, so 2 or 3 would be a partially correct. Please make sure that your t-statistic is labeled as t. It's not just a number hanging out there naked with no reason for why it's there. Make sure that you have a t equals, or for proportions that you would have a z equals. And then make sure that your p-value is also labeled as a p-value. Don't have naked numbers. Does anybody have any questions about scoring this one? Yes?
So did we not have to mention randomness because we're basically saying like we're trying to generalize to anyone who resembles the sample?
So didn't have to talk about, you had to talk about random assignment, but you didn't have to talk about random selection because they are just trying to generalize to people that are like the ones in this study. Yes. Desk 6. All right, any other questions on scoring section 2? All right, let's go look at section 3 then. Only 2 components in section 3. First component provides a correct comparison of the p-value to alpha. P is less than, P is greater than alpha, and provides a correct decision about the null and or alternative hypothesis. So because the p-value is 0.002 something, you would say because 0.002 is less than, what was it, 0.05, is that what they had you using? 0.05, we would reject the null hypothesis. That's component number 1. Component number 2 states a conclusion in context consistent with and in terms of the alternative hypothesis using non-deterministic language. We do have convincing evidence that mu diff is greater than 0 in context. You wouldn't want to say mu diff, that the differences between placebo minus omega-3 in irritability score is more than 0, that there is a difference here. If you got both of those components, give yourself an E. If you got one of those 2 components, please give yourself a P. And if you did not get either component, give yourself an I. Any other questions about scoring here? All right, let's give yourself a numerical score. Because we graded in 3 sections, that means 3 E's is a 4, 2 E's and a P is a 3, 2 E's and an I, 1 E and 2 P's, an E, a P, and an I, or 3 P's is a 2, an E and 2 I's, or 2 P's and an I is a 1. Anything else would be a 0. We are going to do question number 5. We are not going to do question 6 today. We will save question 6 for tomorrow because question 6 they recommend giving 25 minutes just to answer the question, and then we'll score it afterwards. So we wouldn't have enough time for me to give you that full 25 minutes for question 6 today. All right, go ahead and begin question number 5. Question number 5. Scoring part A for question number 5. We had 5 components. If you get at least 3 of the first 4 and component 5, then you get an essentially correct. The direction of the association, positive or increasing. The strength of the association, it should say strong. Form of the association, linear or approximately linear. Unusual features, there are no points with large discrepancies from the straight line pattern exhibited by most of the points on the plot. You don't have to have that many words, but you could say something like, there does not appear to be any unusual features on the graph. And component number 5 is context. You need to have association between chest circumference and weight of the tool elk. You want to make sure that you have both of those pieces there. So again, if you got 3 of the top 4, so 3 of the pieces of Duff's and your context, you get an essentially correct on part A. If you only got 1 or 2 of the components of Duff's and you got your context, that is a partially correct. Or, where did that go? Just totally disappeared on me. The other way would be if you satisfy 2. Come on, stop going all over the place. So if you got 3 of these 4 and context, you get an essentially correct. 2 of these 4 and context, you get a partially correct, or just 2 of these pieces. Then you get a partially correct. You just set it on my desk. Does anybody have any questions about scoring this one? Please give yourself an E, a P, or an I. Part B. 2 components here. You provide the correct value of 196.17 kilograms in part BI with work shown, and provide the correct value of 8.13 kilograms in part BII, or a value consistent with the predicted weight calculated for component 1 with work shown. If you got both of those components, that's an essentially correct. Only one of the 2 components would be partially correct, or if you give both of the correct values with no work shown, that would be a partially correct. So the predicted weight of a male tool elk with a chest circumference of 145.9 centimeters, you take the 145.9, you plug it into the equation, and that's where that 196.17 kilograms came from. So if you show it plugged in and then this value here, that would be sufficient for part BI. And then for BII, the residual with a chest circumference of 145.9 that has an actual weight. Remember, residual is actual minus predicted. So that would be a positive 8.13 because the actual was higher than the predicted. What's the acronym that you can remember for residual? RAP. Residual is actual minus predicted. Does anybody have any questions on scoring part B? If you got both components, give yourself an E. Only one of the 2 components or both right answers but no work shown would be a P. Anything else would be an I. There are 3 components on part C. Identifies the value of the slope as 3.7455. Component 2 provides an interpretation that references an increase of a number of kilograms of weight for each 1 centimeter increase in chest circumference. That is the interpretation of the slope. So you can see over here, the predicted weight of a tool elk increases by 3.7455 kilograms for each additional centimeter of chest circumference. Component number 3 indicates that the slope represents a change in a prediction using non-deterministic language such as predicted, estimated, expected, or average. You have to use one of those words because this is not a guarantee that the male tool elk will go up that much in weight for the increase in centimeters of chest circumference. It is what the model predicts will happen. If you got all 3 components there, give yourself an E. If you got 2 of those 3 components, give yourself a P. If you got only 1 or none of those components, give yourself an I. Yes?
We have to actually say that this is like this being a part of the answer doesn't count for like the first because technically the question didn't say identify and interpret.
Yeah, let me see. Interpret the slope of the least square. If you have that 3.7455, I think that would be sufficient. If I remember correctly from grading this one, if you did not specifically say the slope is blah and then have your interpretation, I think it's okay. What they'd be looking for in there is, did you grab the right number as the slope for your interpretation, as opposed to grabbing the y-intercept or something else. So I think that would be okay. Yes. Any other questions on part C? All right. Let's go look at part D. Part D has 3 components, gives a correct p-value of 0.002, consistent with a 2-sided alternative hypothesis, provides a correct comparison of the p-value to the alpha value, p is less than or p is greater than alpha, and provides a correct decision about the null and or alternative hypothesis, provides a conclusion statement in context consistent with and in terms of the alternative hypothesis using non-deterministic language. So for part DI, what we'd be looking for here, you would have 28 degrees of freedom. For 28 degrees of freedom, the p-value would be 0.001 because it's a 2-sided test that would make it 0.002. You could use the calculator, I believe. Did they give you a test statistic? So since they gave you a test statistic and you know your degrees of freedom, you could put it into the calculator to get the p-value. You do not have to use the table to get the p-value. Just make sure that you times it by 2 since it's a not equal. And then because the p-value 0.002 is less than alpha 0.05, we reject the null hypothesis. That's component number 2 right there. There is sufficient statistical evidence, or there is convincing evidence, that the population slope for the linear regression of weight versus chest circumference for male tool elk is different from 4.5 kilograms per centimeter. That would be a full and correct answer. If you have all 3 components, give yourself an E. If you have 2 of those 3 components, give yourself a P. If you have 1 or none, give yourself an I. Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Because I didn't say 4.5.
No. Beta equals 4.5. We do have convincing evidence that the slope of the population regression line for male tool elk is different from the slope of the population regression line for male sandbars. And we know for male sandbars it's 4.5, right?
Yes.
So because you put it right here, you're good.
Okay.
Yes, you would be good. You're welcome. Does anybody else want help scoring part C? This is another one that, because we're in 4 parts, you can go ahead and give yourself a number. It is 1 for every E and a half for every P. When in doubt, on a half, round down.
I have a question. How would you do them in the calculator?
This is not a chi-square. Chi-square is for categorical data. This is for slopes, so this would be a t-test. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then also, it was 0.17.
Oh, no, that'd be fine. Like if there's usually a range of values that they will accept as correct because of rounding differences and rounding errors. Yes, you're welcome. All right. Tomorrow we will finish this out. We will do question 6 and we will score question 6. We will talk about what next week looks like. Your multiple choice packet, the final multiple choice packet, is due on Tuesday next week. I will accept it late until your exam. I will not accept it for points after the exam. I'll accept it and remove a missing assignment, but I won't accept it for points if it is turned in after the exam.